friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about some of my absolute favorite books to read, and that is dark academia. So I'm going to be tier ranking all of the dark academia books that I have read. It's a lot. These are some of my absolute favorite books. I love this genre. I love reading about literature and school. I'm a Gemini, I'm a nerd. So I've read a lot of the kind of quintessential dark academia books. So I'm hoping that this list will help you out if you're looking to start reading some dark academia this fall and winter. It's the perfect time to read these books. Before we jump into the actual tier ranking, I just want to chat a little bit about what dark academia is, because really, this is a subgenre and it started on Tumblr as like an aesthetic, and it does kind of get some criticisms here and there for being shallow and not really being focused on the actual content of the books, but more so just the aesthetic, right? Plaid, coffee, dark browns, argyle print, that prestigious university type of look. There's like 3 to 4 main criteria for a dark academia. I do have a few that I'm just calling kind of dark academia adjacent that are honorable mentions that I think if you like dark academia, you would like these and might want to give them a try. They don't quite fit in the genre, in my opinion. So technically this isn't something that you're gonna see on like Goodreads as a genre, but dark academia generally falls under historical fiction, fantasy, magical realism, and mystery thriller. Those are kind of all the facets of a dark academia. They can kind of fall under one or more of those traditional genres. So we're just gonna quickly go over what I consider to be the 4 facets of a dark academia. This is pretty widely accepted in the book community for what a dark academia is. I'm not just making these up. As the name suggests, this is a book and a story that has a heavy emphasis on academics, specifically the setting being at an academic institution, generally a college or a university. If the plot and the characters are heavily involved in libraries, reading, philosophy, the arts, you know, quests for knowledge, that kind of thing, I think kind of just sums up that category. 2, style-wise, it's generally considered to be like a gothic setting or style. Dark academia also tends to have some kind of mystery thriller aspect, and if it doesn't, then it has some kind of like dark foreboding atmosphere, something that's just kind of eerie. You're trying to unravel something, solve a problem, solve a mystery. So even if it's not technically a mystery or a thriller book, there's that underlying plot of trying to uncover a secret. Secret societies are also very common in dark academia. And lastly, dark academias often focus on some kind of question of morality. They're having conversations, whether it's blatantly put out there or it's a bit more subtle, conversations of good versus evil. So when determining the books that are on this list, these are all generally on like the Goodreads dark academia list. So that being said, this is by no means an exhaustive list. There are some that are high up on my priority of ones that I want to get to. Once you see what some of my favorites are, I would love to hear your recommendations. Let's jump into the official dark academia tier ranking. I'm very excited about this. Okay, so we're in the official tier ranking now. These are pretty straightforward. I went with a kind of traditional grading system here for purposes of this video. S meaning my favorites, above and beyond, you did the extra credit, and the rest are pretty much going accordingly. And then you'll see down at the bottom, I have a dark academia adjacent category. I think could kind of be in the dark academia conversation. I'm just putting them here because I have seen them on quite a few of these lists. Also, something to note is a lot of these I did include on my fantasy tier ranking. So if you're interested in that one, I will link it in the card above as well. Okay, so we're officially here in the tier ranking, and I'm just so excited to talk about these because I'm telling you, some of these are my favorite books of all time. We're gonna start with one of my favorite books, that is Bunny. How do I even begin to describe Bunny? That in and of itself is a description of this book. Basically, Bunny is about a scholarship student who attends a college based in New England, and she's in like a fictional writing class. And in this class, there is a group who are all very stereotypically kind of preppy, popular girl looking. They all call each other Bunny, and they have a kind of secret group that they call the Smut Salon. I know, crazy, but this main character basically finds herself being invited into this cult-like group of bunnies. She herself has a wild imagination. She does a lot of like dark daydreaming, imagining things, and as the book goes on, the lines of reality and imagination really start to blur. This has been compared to the Heathers, Frankenstein, The Craft. All of those things I do think give a good vibe of what Bunny is about. It's completely absurd, it's bizarre. You'll be saying, what the hell just happened? What's going on? This is the craziest shit I've ever read. And for that reason, I absolutely love it. I would say go into this not expecting a traditional academic type of experience. It's off the walls. It's definitely like a magical realism. It's very much heavy on like satire around the entire academic experience overall. And for that reason, I just really love it. It's not so much gothic, I will admit. It's more of a contemporary setting, but it does have that New England University feel. I feel like this is also one that if you read it, you are gonna love it or hate it. And if you love it, it's really gonna kind of open up your eyes to a lot of different kinds of interesting books that you might wanna get into. Next, we have A Study in Drowning. This one is by Eyre Reed. This one is going in B tier for me. It's okay, it's good. I really enjoy the vibes of this one, but the execution fell a little bit flat. It had a really promising premise. It's about a young girl. Well, she's not young. I mean, I think she's like 18, early 20s maybe. She's studying architecture, but she's also very much obsessed with this one specific author who wrote this like fantasy fairy tale book. And it's always been like her favorite thing. She's like researched this guy. She knows like his life story. She's obsessed with him. And then when he dies, his estate puts on a competition, essentially inviting one person to come and like redesign his estate. She takes this as like a sign. She's studying architecture. She knows everything about this man and his legacy. So she goes to this creepy, damp, gothic manor by the sea and meets another young man who ends up, you know, turning into the love interest of this story. But Eyre Reed really goes in hard on the descriptions of this. There's this event that happened, the drowning, that's like this kind of big mystery about all these people that died in a drowning in this area. So all the parts are there, but then by the end, you realize that this kind of drowning and description of this place being like practically underwater and all this stuff had absolutely no real impact on the story. It really was just kind of like all a means to an end to get this like couple together. So it didn't really deliver. It does kind of give that overall eerie, creepy feel. So I think a lot of people probably would really like this. Just not my favorite, but I do think it was an enjoyable read. We're not going to go straight into the secret history yet, okay? I can't do that quite yet. We're going to go with The Maidens. I do not know how to pronounce this author's name, but this is the author who did The Silent Patient, which I actually quite enjoyed. This one, not so much. Again, the premise and the idea of this is really cool. This one leans more into like the thriller suspense genre as well. It's about a Greek tragedy professor at Cambridge University who, you know, totally innocently, not suspiciously at all, has a secret society of female students who are like obsessed with him. Wasn't a huge fan of that, but this kind of secret club of all of these young girls are called the Maidens. And then it follows another character who was kind of like, you know, 3 levels removed from him. Her character becomes kind of obsessed with finding out the mystery of how one of the maiden students dies. So it's kind of this like mystery the whole time. There's a lot of cool Greek mythology, philosophy references here, but for me, the reason this isn't rated higher was because of the ending. I found a lot of the writing quite problematic actually as well, and I just really did not enjoy the ending. I have mentioned this on this channel before. I cannot stand when thrillers just throw a like gotcha, aha moment at the end and it just kind of comes out of nowhere. I just didn't really enjoy a lot of the ways that things happened and came about in this. I can't really say more than that without kind of like giving it away. But another one where the premise was really cool. This one definitely has all the characters of Dark Academia, the setting, the mystery, lots of like parallels and references to ancient Greek mythology. But overall, the ending kind of ruined it for me, so it wasn't my favorite. Let's do Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. I really enjoyed this one. I believe this is her first book in the kind of adult fiction genre. This one is pretty straight up dark academia. It's on every list that you're gonna find. This one also falls kind of under the magical like fantasy genre. Ninth House follows Alex Stern. She is approached to attend Yale after essentially like dropping out of high school. She was the only survivor of like this homicide attempt on her life. She's like in the hospital. She's like getting in all this kind of trouble. Basically, her life is not going great. She is mysteriously approached by this stranger and it's like, we want you to come study at Yale. Not suspicious at all, right? And then when she's there, she is tasked with following and kind of like monitoring this secret society at Yale. So she has these magical powers. It's kind of just really setting itself up for the next book, in my opinion. So it's not top tier. Like, it is a good Dark Academia book, but it did feel a little bit, it just felt a little bit underwhelming in terms of like, what's the direction? Like, what's the point? What's the plot here? One reviewer pointed out that something that I didn't pick up on, but makes total sense now from looking back on it. There's barely any dialogue in this. It's a lot of info dumping. It's a lot of narration. So it's a little bit slow. This one also is pretty like graphic. There's a lot of shock value in this. It's not quite horror, but there's a lot of trigger warnings, a lot of dark content in this one. So it was a bit of a slower read for me, but I'm still really looking forward to the sequel of this one, Hellbent, which I think came out this year or last year. But just really well done. I overall really love Leigh Bardugo's writing. I also really just enjoyed the main female character. She was kind of just like fucking shit up for no reason other than she just could, and she didn't care. And she had these cool magical powers, and she's awarded this interesting kind of life event. And she just kind of goes with it, and I enjoyed her character and I really liked it. So I can't put it off anymore, but The Secret History is quintessential dark academia. It is one of, if not the most pivotal book for this subgenre. It's an absolute masterpiece in my opinion, one of my favorite books of all time. This is a haunting, meandering, philosophical story about a group of misfit kids, essentially. Very pretentious college students all studying the classics. And they're all, again, in a very like tight-knit group with a kind of professor that they all idolize. Again, that's kind of a common theme in dark academia. And this one is really interesting because the way it starts out is you find out that there's a murder. The whole thing is basically a retrospective look at the past leading up to this event that you now know happens. But not once while reading this book do you feel like spoiled by it. Like, it gives so much context. It gives so much background into like why this is all happening. The characters are so interesting. It has everything. It has the mystery. It has the kind of questions of morality and coming to terms with doing bad things. Very emo, pretentious overtones. Heavy topics as well in this one, but just everything that I love in a book. So in my opinion, one of the best ones that you can pick up in this genre, absolutely. It's honestly my top recommendation from this entire list. So let's do one that I really hate. The Atlas Six is one of the worst books on this list that I have read. This is an example of a book that saw all of the tropes of the secret history and the dark academia genre and just wanted to capitalize on them without actually providing any genuinely good writing, plot, characters. It's all terrible in my opinion. It relied so much on the tropes that it created absolutely nothing of substance. This is again the story of 6 intellectuals, pretentious kind of students who are all introduced into a secret society, the Alexandrian Society, which basically is like the kind of caretakers of this secret library where like all of the world's like most hidden secrets and books and information all lives. Also has a lot of fantasy. The magical element and world building in this is so poorly done that I couldn't even tell you how the magic system works, because there's no magic system. It's all random. It serves no purpose. Everyone just like has a random power, and you're like, okay, like one of the girls' power is literally just like being hot, so she can like seduce people and like get people to do what she wants. This is one where Book Talk got it wrong, okay? I know you're gonna see this recommendation when looking up for dark academia books. Don't be fooled by it. It's one of the first books that I read in this genre. I think that's the case for a lot of people. They mistake this book being good with actually just liking the vibes, because the vibes can be there, but the vibes absolutely fall apart when you realize how poorly this book is written. I even read the sequel. I gave it a chance because I'm so interested in this style of book, and the second book was even worse. So just skip it in my opinion. Not worth it at all. One that is worth it though, another very popular Book Talk booktube recommendation is If We Were Villains. This is one where when I read it, I rated it a little bit lower, but now looking back on it, I think it's in the top tier of a lot of these dark academias. Basically the Secret History's little sister. It's very similar, not quite as top tier in my opinion, but it's very similar in structure in that it's told again in like a retrospective lens where one of the main characters is talking to like a detective about something that happened in the past, and he's like recounting the events. I really like that narrative structure. I think it's really interesting, but again, it's a small group of pretentious intellectual students. In this case, they're specifically studying Shakespeare. So there's a lot of really beautifully written, really Shakespearean passages in this one. The classical vibes are just like off the charts. So I think, you know, between like If We Were Villains and the Atlas 6, they're not even on the same wavelength. Like If We Were Villains is definitely a good one to go for. This next one I'm going to talk about is one where I almost put it in the adjacent, not kind of in the same realm as the others, but the more I thought about it, I was like, you know what? It kind of is. It's kind of dark academia still. The thing it's missing, I'm just gonna say, okay, this is They Never Learn. It doesn't have that kind of classic gothic secret society intellectual vibes, but it does have the kind of murder mystery, dark, and it's an academic setting vibes. So this one is about a professor at a university who essentially plots to murder men on campus who are like abusing and assaulting women. So she's kind of like that female vigilante, you know, type of vibes. So it's a little bit different, but it does still very much have that like collegiate university feel, because all the characters are some way like integrated into that like school system. They're students or professors. Definitely more of a mystery thriller. I personally really liked it. I really enjoyed just like the female rage kind of vibes. None of the plot is really like dependent on academics or her being a professor. It just like happens to be the setting. It's kind of predictable. You're kind of like spoon-fed the plot in this one, in my opinion, but I just did really enjoy the reading experience, and it does give the vibes. Okay, let's go with another S tier. This is another quintessential, kind of the blueprint for dark academia, and that is the classic, The Picture of Dorian Gray. I absolutely love this book. It's so incredibly well done. It's so clever. It's just a book where you just feel like you are in it. You are a part of it. It is a part of you. You really get all of the intricacies that come with like the human experience and the human soul with this book. It's essentially about a young man, Dorian Gray, charismatic, like well-loved person in society. He basically is so obsessed with being liked and being young and being beautiful, basically sells his soul and subjects himself to like eternal damnation in exchange for being young and beautiful forever. Portrait of him that was done by an artist who was basically obsessed with him and like enamored by his beauty deteriorates and becomes this like gross, old, grotesque symbol of his actual soul, while his corporeal body remains intact and young and beautiful and all these things that he values the most in life. Just a really visceral look in like the human soul, our obsession with beauty, our obsession with youth and our fear of aging, our own sins and vanity and revelations about what that really can mean, what's really important. It's just perfection. It's just perfection. It's also a really short read, so it's one that I feel like is a really easy introduction to the genre. Okay, so we're getting down to just a few more because a few of these, like I said, are in the kind of adjacent category, and I'm not really actually gonna like rank them. This is A Deadly Education, which is part of the Scholomance series. This one is one where I'm torn. Like I almost want to put it in C, but I don't know. I feel like it's just quite mediocre where it could kind of go either way. Like I said, so the Scholomance series, that's the name of this academic university college, basically, which is a magical school. Very like Harry Potter elements in this one. They all have these kind of different like power prophecy type of situations. And she's kind of like a power of death, a master of death type of ability, if you will. And she can essentially, you know, end any threat to herself, but she constantly kind of lives in this fear that she could just like wipe everyone else out with her powers. And then the whole like premise of the school is that it's basically just haunted by these like mysterious monsters, and they're basically just like, don't walk the halls alone at night, like just don't get killed by these monsters, and then just kind of like practice your skills while you're here. And it's set in a school, but there's really no educational system because there's literally no teachers. There's no like class structure. There's no teachers or professors. I found that to be a very odd choice. They're all just kind of tinkering around, going to random different classes that kind of work or make sense for their power. And then there's the obviously kind of like typical attractive hero, arrogant type of male character who comes in. And it's kind of just like a romance in that way. I didn't find it to be truly like dark academia in the way where there's like a mystery and like gothic vibes. It kind of just felt like a school setting for like a romantasy plot. Just didn't quite work for me. Had a lot of potential with the setting, but there's, like I said, there's no lore. Like there's no substance here. I found it really half-baked. Writing was it was very like immature, read very YA. So it wasn't my favorite. And you know, the more I'm thinking about this, the more it's going in C. So I'm sorry, I'm changing my mind on that one. I really like struggled to get through it. I don't think it's on tier with Study and Drowning and They Never Learn. So it's getting knocked down. The more I talk about it, you know, the more you learn, the more you know. So, okay, we are down to the last S tier on this list. I have mentioned this many times before on this channel. This is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This, on par with Secret History, one of my favorite book reading experiences I have ever had. Babel is, it literally like makes me speechless. Like when I think about it, I'm just like, R.F. Kuang will be a classic author in the future. I think that her works are becoming modern classics. Honestly, kind of even hard for me to like articulate what it's really about because it's so layered. It's so like deep philosophically. But this one is basically reads very historical fiction with fantasy, magical realism elements. It's set at Oxford University, but it's in a fictional Oxford University, right? And there is this specific tower at Oxford that is like the World Center for Translation. So all about like languages. In this world, language and translation is used to enchant silver. And those silver bars are essentially used by the British Empire. They're basically using it for any challenge that they might have, whether it be economic, industrial, social, doesn't matter what it is. They're using this knowledge and this quest for absolute knowledge to essentially become like this world domination, right? It's essentially about colonialism and the exploitation of all of these different cultures and language and knowledge for the benefit of this colonial British Empire. Her mind, heavy on themes of morality, good versus evil, colonization, racism, revolution. Just insanely well done. There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to be said about this one, but it's a lot to take in, but it's just a beautiful experience. One that I can't recommend enough. Okay, and then to go on the opposite spectrum of that one, I'm not even gonna chat about this one much because if you saw my other tier ranking, I also ranked this in the worst category possible. That's Zodiac Academy. This was basically described as like a dark Harry Potter, which is the reason why I wanted to pick it up. It's about two Gemini twin sisters who go to this magical school. That's all fine and great until you actually read it and you realize it's just a bully romance. And there's actually no intellectual thought at all. Absolutely abysmal. Wouldn't recommend it to my worst enemy. And then we're gonna go with one that's just one that I personally could not get. I couldn't wrap my head around it and I wanted to love it so badly. And that was the Starless Sea. I wish I got it. I wish that I loved it because I love the Night Circus so much. But this one is definitely speculative fiction and heavy on the speculative. This one is about a grad student who discovers like an ancient library, and again, amazing premise. I love that. He's drawn to like this ancient textbook and he's basically reading it and it's kind of like time jumping. He's getting, you through him are experiencing these various stories in different time periods and different places, but you don't know what's going on. You don't know where you are. You don't know if it's real. You don't know if it's him. You don't know if it's someone else. Speculativeness of it just did not work for me. It didn't click for me. And, you know, you kind of obviously, if you read books, you kind of understand how that plot device is going to work, but it's all going to kind of come together in the end. And it's going to like, the dots are going to connect. But to me, the dots just never really connected. It's not quite dark either, I would say. It's more like dreamy. It's more like fluffy randomness. I wanted to love it really badly, but like I said, it was so obscure that it just didn't work for me. I think maybe in a different time and place it would have, but unfortunately it just didn't. I do think it's worth picking up if you really like speculative fiction, if you really just like storytelling and you don't need to understand, you don't need a plot. Generally that works for me, but for this one, for whatever reason, it really didn't. It might be one that I revisit later. And then lastly, I've been yapping for 45 minutes, so I'm not gonna go into like premises or any of these really that in depth, but these last 4 books are ones that I did kind of see come up on these lists, and to me, they're just not quite dark academia. 2 of them are classics, and then 2 of them are more contemporary. So that's Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, which is about like 2 journalists. It's just not academic enough for me. This one's really more just like a historical fiction romance. Very light on the fantasy, very light on the academics. Don't think it quite fits, but if you like dark academia, you would probably like the book. Same with Belladonna. Again, see this one sometimes on lists, but it's really more of a gothic fantasy. More set in like a family manner. Witchy, herbal kind of poisonings and things. So there's definitely mystery and intrigue there. Heavy gothic vibes, but no academic premise there. Still really recommend both of those. And then these last 2 I absolutely recommend and love them, but they're classics to me. They are gothic, but just don't hit that mystery, academic, good and evil, morality type of criteria. to be on Dark Academia list, and that's Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights by Emily and Charlotte Bronte. Again, love both of these. Highly recommend. High on the Gothic scale, but they're more really about romance and kind of like coming of age. Wuthering Heights specifically is like just a trip, like an emo, gothic, sad, despair trip. More just a classic fiction in my opinion than a Dark Academia. And Jane Eyre, more of a coming of age. She is, some of it I believe is set in like a boarding school. Just not quite enough of those criterias to me to consider it be a Dark Academia. I really just think they're more classics. That is it for my Dark Academia tier list. Thank you for listening to me yap. I think this is even longer than my fantasy tier ranking, and that one had like 40 books on it. Those are definitely both like my favorite genres to read, so I really enjoy being able to talk about them and giving you some recommendations. Again, please let me know in the comments if you have recommendations for me of some Dark Academias that I should check out. It's really, truly something that I love to read, and I would love to add more to my TBR. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I will catch you in the next video.